What's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Coffee with Cory. I'm your host, Cory Smith, here with Andrew Ivins, Director of High School Recruiting for the 247Sports site. Andrew, obviously, we're going to talk about Gunnar Rivers here in just a second and all this different stuff, but just your thoughts on what that means for NC State and what what that kind of brings along with it, because we know that, big recruits like that can kind of propel you a little bit when it comes to the world of recruiting too.
Well, I think I said it on your guys' site, right? I think it's a huge commitment. And I was behind the scenes, like trying to pound the table in the 247 Sports, CBS Sports world. I'm like, hey guys, like this is one we should probably talk about a little bit, maybe on CBS Sports HQ. And that's in large part, number one, because he's the son of Philip Rivers, who just was taking NFL snaps last season.
Yeah.
I think one of the better quarterbacks of our generation when you look at the longevity and what he was able to do. And then the second part is, I think Gunnar is one of the top passers in this 2027 cycle. So it's huge news. And I think every time NC State is mentioned, maybe outside of the triangle in years to come, people are going to associate the Wolfpack. Hey, well, Gunnar Rivers kid is there, and I think for NC State that's a huge boost, right? In this name, image, and likeness era, and it just with where college football's gone. I mean, we've seen it with some of these high-profile quarterbacks. They pick a school, and the expectation is normally that they're going to play early, and that kind of drives conversation around the program. And I think for NC State, like everything I've heard, everything I've seen, like this is a guy you want to have your team associated with.
Yeah, and another aspect to this too is the fact that there's been a little bit of kind of outside noise about the fact that he dropped in the rankings yesterday, and the composites, it was a big drop and all this different stuff. Well, that had absolutely nothing to do with 247 Sports, just so we're clear. You guys have him currently rated as a top 50 overall player, number 41 in the country, number 6 quarterback, and then also the number 1 player in the state of Alabama for the 2027 class. Just what are your thoughts on Gunnar Rivers as a prospect and what the future holds for him too?
I think, again, like one of the best passers in this 2027 class, and we'll learn more about the group as we kind of get through the spring camps and the Elite 11 finals. And then obviously there's always going to be guys that rise during those senior seasons, but just polling different kind of personnel staffers and contacts around the country, I don't think it's a great year at the quarterback position, this 2027 class. I think there's some dudes at the top of the board, but I really don't think there's a ton of depth. And that's my opinion after watching a lot of these guys coming off the junior seasons. That's, again, just trading information with various sources around the country, and then also tapping into Brian Stumpf, who runs the Elite 11. And hey, you guys are going to take 20 quarterbacks. What does this group look like? And I think it's kind of wide open. And why I bring that up is because Gunnar is one of the guys I think we feel the most confident about in terms of his abilities and what he can be at some point down the line. I think he's a high-level distributor. It's a kid where if you turn on the tape, you can tell that he's been around the game for a very long time, which isn't surprising, but he makes anticipatory throws. He's very accurate. He takes care of the football. He's got that kind of shot put like release like his father. And I think, that maybe turns some people off, but at the same time, if dad made it work, Gunnar can as well. And then you kind of dig into the on-field resume. He's already a 3-year starter. He's thrown for over 10,000 yards. He's thrown over 80 live pass attempts against varsity competition. He's got 111 touchdown passes. You look at the last 2 seasons, he's only lost 3 games after, going 6-5 as a freshman, and he's got 1 more year to go. So I don't think there's an exact formula when it comes to scouting these quarterbacks and evaluating these quarterbacks and, figuring out who's going to have the most success. If there was a formula, then we wouldn't have the NFL draft, and every year quarterbacks going at the top of the board. Everyone would have their guys. So you never really know. But for us at 247 Sports, we're going to value, the accuracy, the live game situations, and just kind of those intangibles. And the other thing with Gunnar, from my understanding, he's one of the kids I haven't seen in person. I'm not sure if it's going to happen, but over 6'3", big frame. He can move in the pocket, senses pressure really well, kind of gets out of sacks. So, he checks box after box after box. And then the more people that have been around him that you talk to, really easy to get excited about his potential and what he could be.
Yeah, I was going to say it's probably very difficult to scout a player when, yes, you see the film and you're able to put all those things together. And, shout out to St. Michael, by the way, for putting the overhead cam so you can see like the entire length of the field. You can see everything there. But when you don't see a kid in person, when he's not, unless you go to a game and, living in Florida, I'm sure it's not always easy to get out to Alabama, but, it's not the easiest scout because you don't see them at the, the opening camps. You don't see them at, Under Armour camps and things along those lines. So he hasn't been out there as much. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, Cory, look, the in-person evaluations are always important. That's a data gathering point. I mean, there's a lot of colleges and offensive coordinators and quarterback coaches that don't operate, they won't offer a guy unless they see them throw live, whether it be at a camp, whether they go out on the road to see them. And, I think it just kind of gives you more conviction. And you're trying to build out a profile on a guy. I mean, I've talked about getting out there to see Gunnar. Maybe it happens here as a senior. I mean, I don't think the Gulf Shores is a bad place to check out maybe in the fall months. So it's certainly unique. And I kind of raised my hand 2 years ago when we first learned about Gunnar, and I said, man, I'm getting some Arch Manning type of vibes from this recruitment. And for those not familiar, I mean, Arch Manning's a kid that didn't have social media.
Yeah.
He's a kid that didn't play 7-on-7. He's a kid that, never did the Elite 11, never did the Under Armour, never did any of that. They were kind of in their own world. And that's because the Manning camp wanted to do that. So I think Phillip has taken a very similar approach. And it's not surprising. I mean, he's been on the Manning cast in the past. I mean, they've blocked out the noise. And, I think it's a very calculated decision. And to me, Gunnar picking NC State, there's probably a lot that went into this in terms of, okay, what's the plan? What is this going to look like 2 to 3, 4 years down the line? So, if I had to like compare the recruitments, I mean, to me, this is the closest thing we've had since Arch Manning. And, it's not Arch Madness yet, but I do think, whenever Gunnar gets onto the field, if he keeps progressing and avoids the setbacks, a lot of eyeballs going to be on NC State.
Yeah, I mean, slightly different in the sense that, Arch Manning ended up being the number 1 overall player in the country, number 1 overall quarterback, obviously. Gunnar, I mean, obviously being a top 50 overall player, being the number 6 quarterback is massive. But it's humongous for NC State. For Texas, it was like, all right, we got Arch Manning. That's excellent. But we've also got, other guys in the pipeline that are ready to go. I mean, what do you see for the timeline for NC State and Gunnar Rivers here? Because, there is going to be some, as you mentioned beforehand, there's going to be some pressure to be like, all right, man, you got him on campus, make him the starter. If, a guy like CJ Bailey were to leave after the season, go to the NFL draft and be that guy after 3 years. Like, what do you see as the ideal timeline here for both NC State and Gunnar Rivers?
I don't say this often because, I mean, we're asked about this, every signing day. And then as we get closer to the season, like, for example, if we look at all the quarterbacks that just signed in the 2026 cycle, and they're like, all right, hey, identify a guy that you think is going to start as a true freshman. I mean, the list is rather short, and that's because the transfer portal has kind of recalibrated everyone's expectations and how these quarterback rooms are built and assembled, how these rosters come together. I mean, it wasn't too long ago, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, where if you signed, a 5-star quarterback or a 5-star quarterback in the 5-star conversation, the expectation was, hey, that guy was going to step in. We got away from that, with the red shirts, and then the transferring, and then everyone had the COVID years. I mean, how many, fifth and sixth year quarterbacks did you have out there? So, and it seems like those are being exhausted. But I think for NC State, right, let's say CJ Bailey does have the year and reaches what his potential could be, and he's a guy that, works his way into the day two conversation in the NFL draft. If he leaves, we'll see how the senior season goes. But when I look at the resume again from Gunnar Rivers, I mean, he's going to have started 50 career games. He's going to have, thrown again for, I would assume, north of 1,300 yards. And the quarterbacks that we have seen in recent years that have made an impact or have earned a starting role as a true freshman, the tying thread with all of them is the live reps in high school. I mean, Bryce Underwood at Michigan, close to 50 starts. Dylan Raiola, a 4-year starter. You look at Malik Washington at Maryland, who started as a true freshman. That's a guy that started over 38 games. Bear Bachmeier out at BYU. So that is kind of the tying thread. And with Gunnar Rivers, 4-year starter again, close to 50 games. So I think for NC State, right? Yeah, I think he can come in and certainly be in a competition. And, if I was the Wolfpack, potentially maybe look to bring in, a veteran transfer just in case Gunnar isn't ready to go. But I don't think it needs to be a high-profile guy. Maybe just a guy with some experience that has done it at the Power 4 level. So to answer your question, could I see him, getting some starting reps 2 years from now? Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it might be, a scenario where you already have Will Wilson on the roster, a guy that was, comes from South Carolina Player of the Year 2 years ago, comes over to NC State, actually an elite rushing quarterback for them this past year with 10 rushing touchdowns. And then you also have Tad Hudson, who was a former 4-star, went to UNC, goes to Coastal Carolina. Maybe that's the ideal scenario where you have, a room where, all right, CJ Bailey exits, you have those three going in there, number one, competing, but number two, being able to learn from each other, because you do have some college experience for both of those guys. Now, granted, Will Wilson only as a rusher so far, but I also wanted to touch on just your thoughts on CJ Bailey too, because I know obviously everybody's always looking at the bright, shiny new toy here and what, is coming up. And this is a pretty big, shiny toy for NC State, but just, CJ Bailey was a guy that I know you vouched for a lot coming out of the high school level. We talked constantly about is he going to get that 4-star? Is it going to happen? And, look, some of the question marks were that he was skinny coming out of high school, that, he had a ton of talent around him. But what have been your thoughts on seeing him really develop into this role at the college level and getting that opportunity at NC State and being the guy now going into year 3 with NC State too?
Well, I wake up Sunday morning in the fall and I'm like, man, wish we had a 4th star on CJ Bailey and had him in the top 247. No, he's exceeded expectations, right? And he was a guy where I thought it was pretty boom or bust. I mean, you go back to his 247Sports profile. I think one of the final lines in there was like, well, hey, if it doesn't work out at quarterback, he could probably play tight end. And I think has he caught a touchdown pass yet at NC State? They worked him in on a trick play. I know that was the case at Chaminade Madonna. No, I mean, this is a kid that when you reflect on the evaluation, and we're always doing that at 247 Sports, right? We're studying the NFL draft. We're studying the guys that are hitting in college. It's like, okay, what makes CJ Bailey what he is? And to me, like, this is a guy that's always been a winner. And I know he's been surrounded by a ton of talent. He had Jeremiah Smith, JoJo Trader with him, Bullet Goss, the running back there. Like, he was on an all-star team, but at the same time, he was the point man, and he allowed that thing to go. And I'll never forget from his senior season, they played a nationally televised game against Miami Central. He threw for over 300 yards. Like, yeah, Jeremiah Smith was awesome, but someone still had to get him the ball. So I think just his growth, what he's been able to do in terms of physically adding some size. And then really the one thing that stands out to me is he's been utilized much more as a runner in college. And he's not a guy that wants to always, exit the pocket and take off. But I feel like he's done more of that as in college. And I think you saw it right away in the spring game. So
Yeah.
He's a guy that we kick ourselves for, but when you kind of revisit it, it's like, all right, this absolutely makes sense. And, the frame, the tools, all that stuff, like, kind of reminds me a little bit of Taylon Green, who was there at Arkansas, came over from Boise State. We saw him in the Senior Bowl. So not surprised that NC State's had to open up the checkbook to keep him there, but kudos to them for trusting their eyes in making the evaluation and getting in on him when they did, because I mean, he's a guy that has a chance to be a legitimate star, not only in the ACC, but all in college football this upcoming season.
Yeah, and going back to the receiving, he does have 2 receptions in his career. Hasn't had a touchdown yet. Both actually were for loss. Trying to run some trick plays. But I feel like I remember, and people can tell me in the comments too, I feel like I remember him catching one and it being I think it was overturned because of a penalty. So you might be right there that like he was in position to do that, but then it was overturned. But anyways, neither here nor there. Last thing I wanted to touch on here too is your thoughts on the NC State, recruiting targets, kind of their board, where things stand going into this, and just some of the top targets that you've kind of looked at and evaluated too. And then, does NC State maybe need to reevaluate a little bit and say, all right, we've got a little bit more to play with here. If you get a little bit more money influx in the system, like how do things change for them too?
Cory, this is going to sound bad. I didn't realize until I sat down to do some prep for this. NC State's never signed a top 25 recruiting class in the 247Sports era, which
they've been very close.
Yeah, dates back to
a couple times, not 25. Yeah,
yeah, 2010. Yeah, I think they're 28th in 2024, 26th in 2018. I mean, if I'm them, I'm pushing the chips in, and I've been asked this multiple times, like, okay, what is the fallout and the impact for this? I think what's different about Gunnar is he isn't a guy that's like on the camp circuit playing 7-on-7. So I don't know really, how many like blue chip top flight wide receivers out there like no, okay, I've seen Gunnar Rivers play. I've caught passes for him at some various park around the country. But then again, I think everyone knows who his father is. And yesterday, I mean, I think if you're an NC State fan, you got to applaud and clap that, the family made the decision to do the news Monday evening, as opposed to like, in the middle of the night, as opposed to a Friday news dump. So they definitely got the most exposure for it. And I think if I'm NC State, that's the pitch. Hey, come play, with the son of an 8-time Pro Bowl quarterback that, just took NFL snaps. So, if I'm them, am I reassessing my board? I don't know, but maybe I'm circling back on some of these targets that, weren't really showing us a ton of mutual interest. I mean, the name that jumps out to me, and I think he's been to NC State before, is like Jackson Dollar, the tight end. I think he's the top prospect in the state of North Carolina. He reminds me a lot of the current NC State tight end that is going to be selected in the upcoming NFL draft, Justin Jolie. I mean, he is a mismatch, exceptional basketball player, and I know he's got all the offers. I know he's going to go on like a dozen school tour here when March opens up. But for NC State, I think you got proof of concept with their tight end. Hey, now we got this quarterback. So like, he's the guy I would certainly circle back on. But I think for NC State, like what always stands out to me and what Dave Doeren and that staff has been able to do is they get guys that have developmental upside and fit what they want to do on both sides of the ball. So you look at, the target list for them and some of these guys that they're supposed to get official visits from in May or June. Rashard Streets, I think he's a guy that, okay, if NC State's going to have a top 25 recruiting class, got to close on this individual. I mean, he has monster production, 15 sacks as a junior after 26 and a half as a sophomore. I think he's a wide 9. I don't think he's like the most technically advanced and polished, but he's a natural pass rusher, and he feasts on inferior competition. And he's got the size to add. And for NC State, I mean, this is a guy that can be a game wrecker in your league. So to me, he's one. And then this running back, Ty Phillips, we're still at 247 Sports kind of going through every state and getting these players ranked. I mean, it's an endless pool. But he's a guy to me that hard runner, contact balance, extends runs, has the speed to reach the end zone. I think he's a guy that can have 3-down capabilities. I think he's a guy that can be a featured back. So, those two targets really, really jump out to me. And, I think the question a lot of people are going to have is like, all right, what receivers are they going to be able to get? I'll say this. I kind of loved how NC State closed out the 2026 cycle at wide receiver. I mean, obviously Tyreek Cooper, led the state in receiving yards, but Amir Aker out of South Carolina, this is a kid that was committed to Liberty. I was telling SEC programs, I'm like, have you seen this guy? I think he's a field stretcher on the outside. He's got excellent track and field data. He was awesome as a senior. And then, I see the vision with Aiden Smalls. So Joker Phillips has, to me, done a really, really good job at that wide receiver position. If you look at what they've done in the past few years, and I don't think Gunnar is going to be stepping into a situation where he doesn't have some weapons to work with.
Yeah, the last guy I wanted to ask you about too, because we had touched on him earlier, but off the air, but Kamarion Johnson, guy that just committed to NC State. I know there's been a lot of buzz, recently about him. I know he went to a camp and, won MVP there and all this different stuff. And obviously he's somebody that I think everyone's still trying to evaluate, but NC State got in early, got him to commit and, already has him coming in for an official visit in the coming months too. Just your thoughts on what his impact could potentially be at NC State.
Yeah, good talent ID by the Wolfpack. I mean, this is a three-phase playmaker. And, I think the big question with him is, where do you play him in the secondary? Yeah. You play him over the top, plays in the slot, he'll play on the outside. He to me has the speed and instincts you want to see. He's gone 4.55 on the lasers in the 40-yard dash twice, in the database we have. And he's done that over the course of a year, 2 different times. So this guy can absolutely roll. And I think it translates on tape in terms of the acceleration and his ability to break on the football. He strikes and run support. I think he needs to kind of improve the technique a little bit and kind of keep in containment, but the ball skills show up on offense. He scored 3 times in the return game as a junior, 2 punt return touchdowns, 1 kickoff return touchdown, 11 touchdown catches, 5 interceptions. This is a guy to me where, he can do a little bit of everything in the secondary. And I think in an era where positional lines continue to blur, where versatility is king, he's someone that has multi-year starter upside in the ACC. And, another really nice early evaluation for NC State, getting in when I think he only had one other ACC offer, Georgia Tech. And, they're going to have to play a little defense here, but really, really like that take for them. And it should be viewed as a key piece in this 2027 class.
Perfect. All right. Well, Andrew, I really appreciate your time. And where can people find you on social media and everything along those lines if they're not already following you from NC State?
Yeah, Andrew _ Ivins. And man, look, I'll finish here. I think Gunnar is a really, really big addition. Again, I mentioned it on the front end. I don't think it is a deep year at quarterback. I think there are some dudes at the top of the board. I would put Gunnar in that conversation. Hopefully I'm going to have a chance to cross paths with him sometime this summer. Hey, maybe he does do the Elite 11, but in terms of a guy that sees the field, can fire accurate passes, make anticipatory throws. I mean, something is absolutely there. And, a guy that we continue to like, and someone that I think NC State should be very excited about.
Perfect. All right. Well, Andrew, I appreciate your time, and thank you to everybody for listening. We will talk to you guys again